want to begin with a little bit of biblical work on formation and transformation. This is a major theme in all of the Apostle Paul's letters, and I'm just going to point out a few of those important texts to a variety of communities to which he writes. To the Philippian church, Paul writes that they are to have the mind of Christ, who was in the form, so morphe, of God, but also took on the form of a servant in our behalf and humbled himself. They are to have the mind of Christ. To the Galatian church, Paul writes that until Christ is formed in you, I feel like a mother in the pain of childbirth. To the church in Rome, Paul writes that Christians are not to be conformed to the pattern of the world, but to be transformed, metamorphosized, transformed by the renewing of your minds. So we have this word, formation, coming up regularly. To the church in Corinth, Paul writes, as we contemplate the Lord's glory, we are being transformed into his image, into God's likeness, with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is Spirit. Eugene Peterson translates this in a very unique way, and I think I'll share that with you. We are transfigured much like the Messiah, our lives gradually becoming brighter and more beautiful as God enters our lives and we become like him. And then in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes in a similar way, or with a similar goal. Be imitators of me, as I am of Christ. The writer of Hebrews admonishes his readers to move beyond the elementary teachings about Christ and eat solid food, so grow up in Christ. And then Paul to the Thessalonians writes that they should warn, encourage, and help each other with patience. So to watch and to care for each other on that journey with Christ. And so also inviting the church to be part of this formation activity. And we could go on and on. There are many other examples, and we could dig deeply into any one of these texts and be enriched by them. Transformation of heart, mind, and soul is what Paul is emphasizing here, allowing Christ to be formed in us. It's primarily the work of God's living Spirit. In each case, he's writing to a community. So it's community work. It's happening in the community of faith, in Christ's body. And it's happening for the sake of the world, which God is redeeming. So this is all about first fruits and giving the world a foretaste of what God is up to. And Romans 8 came to mind too, that it's the Spirit in us that makes us cry, Abba, Father, the Spirit who intercedes on our behalf and who makes us groan with a kind of holy impatience for that which God is bringing. So again, I think that's the real root to much of our Christian activism, this holy impatience that the Spirit gives us, because we already have that taste of what is coming, of God's coming kingdom. So in these texts too, I think we could say Paul is modeling the role of a mentor, modeling the role of someone who guides his Christian brothers and sisters, teaching them to be attentive to what God's Spirit is doing, and then teaching them also to attend to certain practices. Practices like in the 2 Corinthians text of contemplating the Lord's glory, for example, or in the Romans text about actually doing things that will open us up in some way to God's presence and to allow us to become partners in that transformation, in that redemptive work that God is doing with us and around us. So in other words, it's a call for us to enter into this activity. So that's a bit of the biblical framework that will guide some of our thinking today. So spiritual formation, a term that we've adopted from another tradition. Roman Catholics and the Orthodox talk a lot about spiritual formation and spiritual direction, and something that we as Mennonites are talking a lot more about. And indeed, we're also training spiritual directors for our own people, and many of you are under the guidance of a spiritual director. And indeed, MCEC encourages that for all of our pastors. Spiritual formation is about the kinds of practices which shape our lives together to enable us to announce and embody the good news of God's kingdom. With that kind of a definition, I hope you can maybe sense I'm trying to connect the term spiritual formation and the concept of spiritual formation with all the hard work we've been doing in the last decade thinking about what it means to be a missional church. There are many ways to talk about spirituality and spiritual formation. Spiritual formation is about the kind of practices which shape our lives together, allowing us to announce and embody the good news of God's kingdom. It's not simply what David Augsburger calls a monopolar spirituality. In other words, self-actualization, coming to know ourselves in our depths. And it's not simply about what he calls a bipolar spirituality. In other words, getting to know myself in and through a relationship with God and ending at that point. But Augsburger uses the term tripolar spirituality. It also has the other in mind, and a kind of spirituality that links all three of those dimensions together. Spirituality, so connecting to my initial comments about my own experience in our congregation, what kind of spiritual formation work can we do to shape ourselves, to shape our congregations in such a way that we have the capacity to announce and embody the good news of the kingdom?